it's quite easy to turn around and say that I was in the Falklands War and got blown up by a landmine or something like that, but that's not the truth. The fact is, it's a side effect of diabetes, type 2 diabetes. It is an awful lot more difficult being without both legs, but that's really when the occupational therapy side of it kicked in. Everything sort of put into place by the occupational therapy department, and it was great, because although I'd opted for both legs to be amputated, I really hadn't thought that far ahead in terms of what my mobility would actually be. But of course they're experienced and knew that there would be the adaptations required for me to continue existence. It was very, very useful for me to be able to get back to living a relatively easy life because of the intervention of the occupational therapy people and knowing in advance what I would need in order to operate. To a certain degree, I think I probably did realise that having both legs amputated would be far more difficult than the one in terms of day-to-day living in the home, and that was where occupational therapy were able to offer guidance and help in making the adaptation. But also when it came to the conversion of the bathroom, it was an occupational therapist that comes and has a look at the situation that you have and makes the recommendation as to what your actual needs are. Therefore, the occupational therapist was able to say, the bath that you've got in there is no use to you at all, so that needs to be converted into a shower. And because the size of the bath, things like that, the easiest thing to do is, rather than put in a cubicle, is to make it a proper wet room. And that was terrific, because all that was recommended by the occupational therapist. Occupational therapy were the people that had the experience and the clout to be able to provide whatever bits and pieces that I might need to help me out. Even this thing. Now you might think, well, so what, that has been a tremendously useful tool, and it was given to me by the occupational therapist in hospital. That and a back sponge. And you might think, well, what's the big deal with that? But I use this thing all the time. My life isn't empty by any means, just because I've lost the legs and use a wheelchair in the home all the time, it doesn't mean that your life stops. In fact, in many ways, it's a lot better. That sounds crazy, but it's true.
My great aunt died of skin cancer about 6 years ago. She raised my mom and was more like a grandmother to me. She was first diagnosed with skin cancer about 20 years ago. She had a few treatments, stayed out of the sun, and we hoped for the best. Well, eventually the cancer spread to her brain, and she lost the sight in her left eye. Her one wish, as her cancer got worse, was to remain in her own home. And thanks to the aid of occupational therapy, she was able to do that. Occupational therapy came to her house, and they helped us organize the furniture in her house. They helped us organize her kitchen so that all her things were accessible. They came and they helped her maintain her endurance so that she could function as independently as possible. As my aunt's health deteriorated, occupational therapy showed her how to use adaptive equipment in the shower, with getting dressed, and also ordered books on tape so that she could still participate in her favorite pastime, which was reading. Occupational therapy was a great help to my aunt by making her disease a little bit more bearable. Occupational therapy helped my loved one, and it can help yours.
My grandmother had hip replacement surgery when she was 80 years old. It was during her recovery in the hospital that she began working with an occupational therapist to help her regain her functional mobility and independence after her surgery. With the use of adaptive equipment, my grandmother was able to dress herself with no assistance. She was happy to be able to do this, but she was depressed because when she asked her doctor when she could return to working in her garden, her doctor told her she would probably never be able to do that again because of the bending and kneeling involved. Her occupational therapist realized that gardening was a really important part of her life and wanted to help her get back to it as soon as possible. Her therapist took the time to speak with her and found out that it really wasn't the physical work involved in gardening that was important to my grandmother. She found that my grandmother had a certain way she liked things done, and she wanted to remain in control of that aspect of gardening. She was afraid that if she hired someone to work in the garden, to do the physical work, that they wouldn't do it the way that she wanted it done. She was afraid that she'd lose control over that. It was the occupational therapist that helped my grandmother develop a plan that would allow her to remain in control of her garden without doing the physical work. The therapist also made sure that we all realized what my grandmother's physical limitations were, so we could be aware of what she could or could not do while supervising in the garden. This really exemplifies what makes occupational therapy such an important part of rehabilitation. They understand that we're all individuals and that our quality of life is greatly dependent upon being able to participate in the activities that we love. They understand that injuries or disabilities not only affect us physically, but also emotionally and psychologically.
Take a walk down, 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 down to the other side. Take a walk with me. Take a walk down.
I'd like to tell you about my mother, who had a dual diagnosis of multiple sclerosis and diabetes, type 2. There was this one therapist, he came out and granted her important wish. My mom began losing functioning in her lower extremities in her mid-40s. This is when we went and met Chris, who was the occupational therapist who helped her a great deal. He came out to evaluate her first, and one of the first questions he asked her, which I'll never forget, he asked her, "What is important to you in regards to your everyday lifestyle?" Right then and there, my mom quickly replied with, "I want to be as independent as possible and remain living in my own home." She was very, very adamant about that. The OT ordered a built-up fork and spoon and a heavy plastic plate with a guard, so it could just stay placed on the tray, and it stuck right to it, so my mother didn't have to worry about the plate moving around. And also ordered her a specialty designed cup, which made it easier for her to grasp. The next area he helped us revise was a bathroom. A shower stall was placed instead of her tub. She had to get that removed. This was aligned flush to the floor for easy entrance and exiting. A handheld shower nozzle was ordered, and a long-handled sponge, which was placed in the lower part of the shower so she could easily access it. My mother and the OT worked together for several months until the MS progressed totally to her upper extremities and she lost mobility there. Even though the MS progressed, leaving her with the quadriplegia, unfortunately, her social life was still a huge part of her life. She was like the matriarch. She had 6 kids, so she planned everything. So the OT then reassessed her living arrangements. My mom and the OT decided that some adaptations needed to be made to her home. So with the help of the OTs and the direction of what to do next, we decided to install sliding doors leading to a deck and a ramp on the back of her house so she could still explore her outside environment. In addition, I purchased a speakerphone so she would still be able to connect to the outside world and talk to her family, friends, therapists, medical professionals whenever she wanted to. This made it easier instead of pushing the buttons on the phone. She just needed a little bit of assistance, and she was able to talk as long as she wanted to. After all these adaptations were made, my mom was still able to remain in her home. Her wish was granted thanks to the direction and assistance of a special occupational therapist whose name was Chris. Now, what can we do as OTs to help you and your loved one?
My dad was diagnosed with macular degeneration at the age of 70. The disease affects central vision but leaves peripheral vision intact. His vision deteriorated rapidly over a matter of months. He was unable to recognize faces. He couldn't drive anymore. Needless to say, my dad became depressed. He had retired from his job as a financial analyst, but had planned to continue working during tax season as well as keeping the books for small businesses. That was something he loved to do, but now it seemed impossible. Our search for help led to an occupational therapist who specialized in vision problems. My dad's office space was assessed and various recommendations were made by the therapist. More intense lighting helped, as well as replacing fluorescent lighting with natural light to reduce glare. My dad could read the newspaper again with the help of an electronic magnifier. His computer was revamped with an extra large screen, large letters for his keyboard, and a magnifying program to enlarge the text. Because of these and other adaptations, my dad continues to work at crunching numbers, though not at the same pace as he used to. This means he gets to spend more time in his garden, something else he loves to do.
Well, Mark was admitted to the hospital where I work, and he'd been in quite a serious car accident. And so when he came to us, he was in a bit of a bad way. He had lots of physical problems and he wasn't able to talk at all. So being able to communicate with him was quite a challenge. He found his circumstances very difficult at the time, and being able to come to terms with how much his life had changed from before his accident to how his life was going to be after the accident. And within that, he was quite aggressive, and he was kicking and hitting at staff and family members, and that posed quite a challenge to be able to get him to engage in any therapy or any sort of activities that we needed him to do. That's where it came about, really, was looking at Mark's quality of life and thinking what is important to him and what's he going to need to be able to do when he leaves hospital. And for the rest of his life, he was quite a young man when he had his injury, and just thinking about what the future held for him, really. And because of his limited abilities at that time, it was also trying to identify how he'd be able to spend his time and live his life productively, really. And because fishing was something that he loved so much, it was an obvious choice, really, to try and look into that. So what we wanted to do was initially identify what skills fishing involved, and would he be able to work towards achieving those. When we first came up with the idea and we're thinking about would it be possible, there was a lot of physical challenges to try and identify with Mark. Obviously, like whether he'd actually be able to engage, because the last thing we wanted to do was take him and show him an activity that he loved but he was no longer able to do. That could have been potentially damaging to him and heartbreaking, really, to put him in that situation. Well, fishing obviously has always been an important part of his life anyway, when he's been growing up, and particularly coming to terms with different things that have happened in his life before the accident as well. Fishing has been something he used to do. So I think it's a natural progression, really, that now he's in a different stage of his life, and so much has happened since his accident that he can just continue to do something that he loves and that he enjoys, and most importantly, he can do it by himself.